G'day mates, it's Busta here, and I would like to give Thrive Market a huge shout out for sponsoring this episode. So a few weeks back, I became a Thrive Market member. They're delivering organic and sustainable groceries right to my door. I've actually gotten one of their custom meat and seafood boxes, and also the new primal buffalo sauce to restock some of my cupboards at my place, and also give the sauce a try. And honestly, I can't imagine shopping for meat any other way. But once you try Thrive Market, you'll love it as much as I do. Here's why. So as a proud Thrive Market member, I get the products that I love, and my paid membership provides a free one for someone in need, like a low-income family, a teacher, a veteran, or a first responder or something. Thrive Market tailors to over 70 different diets and values like paleo, keto, or plant-based, delivering the highest quality organic and sustainable essentials from groceries, healthy snacks, meat and seafood, clean wines, non-toxic cleaning, and even bath and body. As a member, I'm saving 25 to 50% off traditional retail prices, and their carbon-neutral shipping is free on orders over $49. The savings I get on my favorite clean organic products are amazing, but I also feel good about helping to support communities in need. And in addition to membership matching, Thrive Market has raised over $750,000 to date through their COVID-19 relief fund. So, go to thrivemarket.com/scared, join today, and you'll get a free gift of your choosing up to $22 in value. That's THRIVE market.com/scared to start your risk-free membership and get a free gift today. thrivemarket.com/scared. My family and I had just come home from staying in a small house near the Redwoods in CA, and immediately after arriving home, everyone decides to sleep since it's very late. After everyone is asleep, I hear a noise in the basement though, so I head down there, cracking the door open, how I always do. That's when I hear the noise again behind me, sounding like someone gasping for air. Turning around quickly, I see a woman with long black hair, pale white skin, and a white gown soaking wet as if she had just gone for a swim, completely clothed. She opens her mouth, making one more loud gasp for air. Then I woke up, realizing that it was just a dream. The next day, my father tells me how, after I went to sleep last night, the security system started acting up. It was not letting him engage because it claimed that the basement door was cracked open. Even after he made sure that it was closed, it was still going off though. My mother later that day told me around 3:30 that she woke up and decided to get some water, and going out into the kitchen, she sees the basement door propped open. Being the only person that does this, she asked if it was me, and I tend to sleepwalk sometimes, but my smartwatch says that I never left my bed that night. Anyway, 3 months after this, I was looking up the history of that house, and I came across a triple homicide plus suicide case. This took place 9 months before we visited, and it stated a father took his wife out to the house's private pond, then wrapped his hands around her neck, forcing her down in the water. After he lured out his 2 young daughters, he drowned them too, and he finished it off and blew his own brains out. Apparently, the neighbor's CCTV footage caught it all, and to this day, I can still hear a very loud scratching and opening of the basement door while I'm awake in my bed. It's genuinely terrifying, and thankfully nothing else has happened so far, but I don't know. What do you guys think? So this is a short one, but it's something that's never left me. It happened when I was 12 or 13 years old. We were visiting our ex-neighbors and took our 2 little dogs with us. At some point after lunch, our parents asked my friend and I to take the dog out for a walk. While on our way back to the apartment, we saw a creepy dude sort of walking in our direction. His behavior was really weird too, sort of whistling very suspiciously, looking at the sky with a terrifying grin on his face. I knew that it was bad the second my dogs were growling and barking at him too, way before he even got near us. I mean, they just never do this. They're just so nice and sweet, and I even suspect that they would even greet a thief breaking into our home nicely. But anyway, we naturally ran away and we got back home quickly. We later found out, though, that turns out this guy was known in the neighborhood for being a pedophile and had several other mental health issues. And chances are that we got out of there in the nick of time. For some backstory, I've always been interested in paranormal activity. It terrifies me, but fascinates me all at the same time, and I've always felt sensitive to it, I suppose. I'm the first one to sort of notice cold spots or energy that just feels different or off in the house, and I've had many personal encounters with activity. But when I was a kid, my parents finally found a deal that worked for them on a good-sized home after months and months of searching. We were not wealthy by any stretch of the word, and my mum was about 7 months pregnant with my little sister, so she wasn't working a lot. But we also had my 2 stepsisters from my dad's previous marriage that would come and stay with us occasionally, and it was always a struggle in the smaller duplexes and trailers that we lived in prior. So when my parents were able to afford a 3-story house, they were elated. Obviously, too, I'm getting this part of the portion of the story from them, but they said that when they went to look at the house, they just immediately felt uneasy. It was a wide-open living dining area, but they felt very claustrophobic and sort of short of breath. They felt that they were being watched and had extreme waves of paranoia and anxiety, but they chalked it up to being emotionally overwhelmed due to the recent financial struggles. And in the end, they were just so excited to have the place that they completely ignored their gut instinct and they closed the deal. And so, in we went. On move-in day, we walk through the front door, and the very first thing that we see is one window in the living room just completely covered in flies. None flying through the room, none on any other windows, and there were so many that only a couple of rays of light were peering through. My dad thought that there must be a dead animal outside, so we went out to look, but there was no carcass or anything. In fact, he had to come and sort of scrape them off the window himself. But we get moved in, and the first few nights were relatively calm, if I'm being honest. I remember hearing a few creaks and moans, but the house was old, so my parents reassured me that it was just the wood. But then my cat started acting really weird. For instance, one night she was on my mum's lap just relaxing, and out of nowhere she just bolts up to all fours, back lurched up to the ceiling, and starts hissing at absolutely nothing. There was nobody in the room, and my dog was downstairs, but she was just staring at the top of our staircase like she was about to attack something, but there was nothing there. My mum was pretty freaked out, but she brushed it off and she went back to watching TV, and my cat went to the stairs. The stairs were sort of tiered, so there were 4 at the bottom, and they leveled out to a little platform, and then there were about 20 that led to our bedrooms upstairs. My cat walked to the top and immediately just froze, almost like she was taxidermied, and all of a sudden she just flies off the stairs. She didn't jump, mind you, and she definitely didn't fall. There was just no way with the trajectory and how she was there and whatnot that she could have flown this way, but it was honestly like she was thrown from there. In fact, it sort of looked like something kicked her off the top as hard as it could. She didn't touch the ground until about 15 stairs down, and then just scampered off into the kitchen and didn't leave for the rest of the night. And my mum lost her mind at that and called my dad, who came in and consoled her, and they went to bed. Fast forward to winter, though, and we have our dog in our basement. She was an outside dog by choice, and we would let her out to the potty and bring her in, and not 30 seconds later, she would just whine to go back out. She roamed our backyard, which was plenty spacious. She was the sweetest dog I ever met. No bias, too. Never so much as growled at anyone. Every person that she met pretty much was just her best friend. She was also very energetic, though, and the basement housed all of my dad's work tools at one end, so we had her on a chain that was just long enough to let her get to every part of the basement, but that little corner because we didn't want her messing up my dad's stuff. But one night, my dad went down to check on her and spend some time with her. We had a door that opened to a small staircase down in the basement, and as soon as my dad saw her, he knew that something just wasn't right. She was at the end of her chain, pulling so hard that she was almost choking herself. Every hair on her back was on end, and she was growling as loud as she could, and my dad said that he'd never seen a dog that angry before. And this is a dog that he's known since she was born, so she knows him, and she didn't think that he was a stranger. But she was snarling and drooling, and my dad said that she wasn't looking at him but behind him like he was invisible. My dad is a tough-as-nails Missouri redneck too, never been scared of pretty much anything a day in his life, but that day I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He came back up, pale as a cloud with the dog, and said that something in this house did not want us here. Over the next few months, we had a sort of smattering of activity. We heard whistling at night, someone would knock on the door, but there would be nobody there. Out of nowhere, we would smell the overwhelming scent of fresh roses. One night, we were playing hide and seek, and my sister hid in the closet, just big enough for her to fit in with those weird sort of accordion doors, so no lock or anything, and I walked by and heard her giggling, so I told her that I found you, and went to open the door, but I couldn't. She thought that I was joking at first, and I was young, I'll admit, but not young enough to not be able to open an accordion door. She started yelling for me to let her out, but for the life of me, I just could not get this door open. I yelled for my dad, and he came to try, and lo and behold, he couldn't open it either. And it was honestly like someone was holding it shut. Again, though, my dad is tough as nails, and a complete hillbilly redneck, and he's a strong guy. And he was yanking on this door with all of his strength, but he just couldn't get it open for the life of him. It got to the point, in fact, where we had to tear apart the door with a hammer to use the knob on the inside. Eventually, we were all so terrified of this place that we called my grandpa to come and bless the house. He was a very spiritual man and had experience with the paranormal and went so far as to get himself ordained. He came with holy water and sage, and he did his thing, but the second that he started, it was like he was just soaking wet with sweat, like he had just run a marathon to get there. He told us right off the bat that something was definitely there, it was not nice, and it didn't want us there. He took about 2 hours and went through the whole house, and when he got to the basement, he hesitated, but he went in anyway, saying that that was the hot spot. We were upstairs while he was down there, but he swore till the day that he died that he saw the shadow of an old man in the corner just staring at him. He was a jokester, but never when it came to his family or their well-being, and he also took this sort of thing very, very seriously. Like I said, he was very spiritual, and this was definitely not his first rodeo. When he finished, though, he said that we should be safe for now, but to look at moving as soon as humanly possible, so that is exactly what we did. We moved not even a month later, and we never thought twice about ever going back. These were my first major experiences with the paranormal, and I've experienced plenty of it since then, but that house will forever stick with me as one of the scariest places that I've ever been to. There was just something really dark there, and I sincerely hope that whoever moved in after us was able to live there safely. If anyone has any questions or wants to talk about other experiences that I've had, then please do ask away, because I might be able to share them in another story here. And of course, I'm more than happy to share them too. Anyway, thanks for listening if you got this far, and I hope you guys have a great week. So, to put it as simply as I can, I was in a very terrifying relationship when I was pretty young. I had actually gotten married when I was 17 to my boyfriend of 3 years, and I'm just going to call him Dave, but Dave was a complete psycho. He was obsessed with blood, occult things, and Charles Manson even. He always talked about how if I left him to watch out for missing redheads on the news because he was going to find me and Ted Bundy me. And when I did finally leave him, it was really scary. He tried to end his own life. He totally tore his own arm open and wrote my name in his blood on our sheets and on my wall. I still had to stay there for a few days to pack my things though, and I was terrified that he was going to kill me or himself. He kept saying things like, "If I can't have you, then no one can, and in another world together we can try again." What the heck, right? And I would also wake up to him standing over my bed while I was sleeping. But one night, a night that I'll never forget, I woke up to the sound of him saying, "If I can't have her, then no one can." I froze and I was scared because something was different about this time. I peeked my eyes open, but not enough to where he would know that I was awake. He was standing over me with a huge knife from our kitchen and was tracing the tip of the knife up and down on his arm and whispering things to himself. I instantly turned toward him and opened my eyes, and we made eye contact. He stopped whispering. He started to walk toward me, and I just said, "Please don't." He stopped. He stared at me for a while and then walked to the stairs or the door of my room. He turned around at the door and stared at me for a while again with the knife in his hands, and I didn't know if I was going to die or if it was him or not, but after a few minutes, he just walked down the stairs and he went to sleep. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and this happened a few years back. I was walking from a friend's house to meet my son's father, X, at a bar that we frequented in those days. It was winter, icy and snowing with giant piles of snow all around. I was walking from a friend's house around 9 p.m. down an alley that served as a driveway area for many houses. Not a great neighborhood by any means, but not particularly bad either. I was wearing my apocalypse boots, waterproof, knee-high, winterproof, and I usually have headphones in blaring music while I walk, but that night, for some reason, I can't remember, I just decided not to. And in hindsight, that may have been the very thing that saved me. So I'm about the equivalent of 2 to 3 blocks away from the bar. There's a younger guy, early 20s, walking about 50 feet behind me, and he says, "Hey, you." I turn around. It seems that he's talking to somebody else. "Hey." I look back, then continue walking. "Yeah, you. No, don't turn around, sweetheart." I start to walk faster as I realize that he's getting closer. Ahead of me, I see an SUV running, backed out of a parking spot, but blocking my path, and I turn around, and there's another guy. The door to the SUV opens, and there's a couple of guys in it looking at me. One gets out and stands by the open door. I turn to look at the guy behind me, when out of nowhere, about 5 more guys come out, surrounding me from a distance, slowly closing in. The realization that they were hiding behind piles of plowed snow hits me, and I realize that they were just standing and watching me. A couple of them had their phones out and were recording something that was about to go down. Nobody was smiling, but they were closing in on me, trying to get me to walk to the SUV. Fight or flight kicked in though, and I just decided that I didn't want to know what was about to happen to me. I wanted to catch them off guard, so instead of running forward, I bolted to the left. And thank God for those boots, I could run across the ice no problem. I ended up cutting through a few yards and made it to the bar, and eventually I got away. But if it weren't for the fact that that ice was so slippery and I had those boots on, I think that I would have been done for. I would like to start this off by saying that this actually took place a few years ago, but it seemed relevant to share here because, well, a lot of people are doing online dating right now. So one summer when I was in law school, I was swiping through Tinder just looking for someone to hang out with. I matched with this guy who seemed pretty nice and looked good. Lots of shirtless photos if you catch my drift, and he was a counselor at a local high school in the metro area. We texted for a while, talked on the phone, and then decided to grab brunch the next weekend. I met him at the restaurant and we had brunch. He was nice, funny, made me laugh a lot. I think we both got a little bit tipsy, and he said that he was going back to a barbecue at his friend's house after brunch and asked me to come with him. He seemed pretty cool and I was having a good time, so I agreed. I had to walk my dog because I hadn't anticipated being out that long, so I told him that I would meet him back at the restaurant in 30 minutes. He said that he really wanted to meet my dog and asked if he could come walk the dog with me, and I sort of thought about it for a second, but my place was just a total disaster, so I told him no in the end. But eventually I came back to the restaurant and we grabbed an Uber to his friend's house. There were a bunch of people drinking and talking and everyone was nice. They had the barbecue situation going on out back, and we talked to some people and hung out, drank. He started to get drunk and also handsy, so I told him that I wanted to drink and walked into the kitchen for some space. A couple of minutes later, he comes into the kitchen and tries to kiss me. I kind of smiled at this and shrugged my way out of his grasp, and I told him that I needed to go to the bathroom. I asked him to grab me a drink and meet me outside in the backyard, and when I left the restroom, I just walked straight out the front door, 2 blocks down, and I took a right. I grabbed an Uber home, and I started getting calls and texts, but I blocked him. He tried to reach out over social media, but I also blocked him there too, and I pretty much totally forgot about him. But fast forward 3 years, I'm sitting on the couch just sort of chilling, reading through the local news on my phone, and I scroll and see a picture of this guy's face again. And he had been arrested for raping women that he met on Tinder all these years. So I was on holidays with my family at my grandparents' house. I must have been 10 or 11 years old. When me and my family go to our grandparents, we often aren't the only ones visiting too. My uncles and their families often also visit my grandparents at the same time as us, so basically, I get to see my whole family. Because of that, it almost never happens that I'm home alone. But there was this one night where I got left home alone because of 2 emergencies. My grandmother and my aunt both had to go to hospital, and my whole family went with them, except for me. I was sick, so I told them that I wasn't feeling healthy enough to go for a 1-hour drive. My grandmother told me that the dog would keep me safe if something happened, and got the whole family out of the house. After they left, I got on my PlayStation 2 and I played some racing games. I can't remember which one exactly, but after some time I heard my dog barking outside. At first I thought that she might be barking at the moon or something, since she does that from time to time. After about 15 minutes, I went outside to check up on her to see if she was maybe hungry or something. But she was right outside, just barking at the living room that was next to the room that I was playing in. I tried to calm her down and get her some treats and water, but she just kind of looked at me and let out a very small cry. After that, she just kept barking at the living room. I just left her to do so since she didn't want to listen to me, and I wasn't that bothered about it. I got back on my PlayStation and tried to get back in the zone, but after about 10 minutes or so, I heard some really loud noises coming from the room next door, and my dog stopped barking and just started crying out for me. I went outside to get him and check out what the hell was happening, but when I looked inside, I saw something that made my heart stop almost. The couches were just flipped back or stood at random places where they shouldn't be. Chairs were broken, paintings on the ground, and some of the light bulbs were completely shattered. Upon seeing this, I closed the door quickly and I ran into my grandparents' room waiting for them to get home. As soon as they got home, I tried to tell my mum what had happened, but she just looked at me and told me that I'm in big trouble for what I've done with the place and that I'll never be left alone again. I tried to convince her that it wasn't me, but she just didn't want to listen to what I had to say. The weird thing is that my family never spoke to me about that night again, and I expected for someone to ask me why I messed up the living room or why I did what I did, but not a single person mentioned that night again. Which means that either they believed me and realized that a 10-year-old kid just wouldn't be able to mess up a room that bad, or they just were really mad at me and didn't want me to keep lying to them. So this happened last night. I, a 25 female, live alone in an apartment in a not very good part of my city. I was lying in bed just watching Criminal Minds when the phone to the door to my apartment complex rang. It's a locked door, so visitors have to be let in, and it rang 4 or 5 times. I wasn't really expecting anyone. It was about 10 p.m. at this point, so I didn't open the door or answer the door phone. I called my mum and I told her that I felt a bit scared. I have a history of abusive relationships and I've been diagnosed with PTSD. My mum told me that it was probably just a neighbour who forgot their key or something. But then I heard the elevator come up, so I went to look through the peephole in my door, and I saw a man in dark clothes and a hoodie get out of the elevator and walk towards my door. Upon seeing this, I freaked out and I told my mum, who I still had on the phone. She told me to step away from the door, so I went into my bedroom. And that was when the man started to pull on the door handle and then proceeded to pound on the door. I was really freaking out at this point, whispering to my mum what was happening. She told me to go and lock myself in the bathroom while she called the police on my sister's phone. The police told my mum to tell me to mute my phone and hang up the call with her so that they could call me. I did so, and they called, and they told me to stay locked in the bathroom and to just be quiet. At the same time, I could still hear the man trying to get in, and it was getting pretty violent out there now. The woman told me that a police patrol was only a couple of minutes away. I was in full-blown panic mode at this moment, and after what felt like forever, the woman on the phone told me that 2 police officers were outside my door, so I could go out from the bathroom and open the door for them. I was crying and hyperventilating and just a complete mess when they entered. One of the officers stayed with me in the apartment while the other searched the building. And unfortunately, they never found the man. So here I am today, still freaked out, not knowing who this man was or what he wanted. But I sure hope that he doesn't come back, whoever he is. Back when I was 18, my best friend Anne and I used to go to this club quite frequently. Legal age to drink in my country is 18. It was a pretty trendy place with cheapish drinks and really good music. My dad never stopped me from going clubbing, but he always told me not to get drunk and to be aware of my surroundings, always. My mum always told me to look out for Anne as well, and for Anne to look out for me. Girls need to stick together kind of thing. So, it was an average ladies' night on Wednesday, where girls enter for free and drinks are cheaper. Anne and I start drinking and we get pretty buzzed, but not drunk. Anne needed to go to the bathroom, so I followed her and waited outside. So the male and the female bathrooms are right next to each other, and there's a sofa in the front so people can sit and wait. On the sofa there was a girl who was obviously very, very drunk, and she was in between 2 guys who were laughing, but it just looked a bit off to me. They were kind of harassing her, which could have been mistaken just as 2 friends having a laugh at their female friend being drunk. But they proceeded to literally carry her out of the club. At this stage, Anne comes out, and I mentioned to her that this girl looks like she may be in danger. But we both tail them, and the more that I see them interact with her, the more that I feel that they're just out to sexually assault her or something like that. My friend and I go up to her and say, "Oh my goodness, it's you, Angela. There you are." We didn't know her actual name, but we just wanted to get her out of that situation. The guys were shocked and they put her down. Anne asks them who they are, and they claim that they were trying to help her and bring her out of the club for some fresh air. I wanted to give them a piece of my mind, but somehow I read Anne's mind and just decided against it. We were 2 18-year-old girls, and they were 2 large 25-plus-year-old guys. We wanted to save the girl, but we didn't want to jeopardize our own safety either. So we pull her away and put our arms around her shoulders, and we carry her outside of the club ourselves. We're trying to ask her if she has ID on her, or if she has friends at the club also, and she was just way too drunk to answer. We finally got outside and saw a small group of guys and girls around this girl's age, and they see us and they run toward us and her, and they were her friends. The girls in the group take her from me and Anne and start talking to her in their own language. The guys thank us profusely, and we explain that we found her inside. We later learn that they were German tourists and their first time in our country as well. It still haunts me, though, to this day on what could have happened if we didn't intervene and save Angela like we did. Remember to please be safe out there, guys, and drink responsibly. And always have a friend with you when you're not. But look out for other girls too, because we need each other. One evening, my mum asked me to go get some bread and milk from the nearest convenience store, which was about a 10-minute walk away. Walking there wasn't a problem as the sun was still out, but it was just starting to set. I went on the main road and there were cars, many cars in fact, and people going past as well. I bought the stuff my mum asked me to get and I started making my way home. But the walk home was different. This time, I decided to take the back road. I just felt like going down the quiet route for whatever reason, and so there I was walking, when a van with tinted windows, yes, I know, very cliche, pulled up next to me. In the driver's seat was a man that asked me for directions somewhere, so I told him. He came up with some stupid excuse that he didn't know where it was and wanted me to come with him. I'm not stupid, so this was obviously a giant red flag for me. I told him no and that I was expected to be home soon. But the man kept trying to persuade me to go with him so I can show him the way. And apparently, him and I arguing was meant to distract me from the fact that there were other men outside the van who had silently opened the door and tried to get behind so that they could grab me and drag me into their van. But I noticed something move behind me and that there's two men coming at me from both directions. I shrieked and I don't even know how I escaped, but somehow I outran two fully grown men like Usain Bolt on crack. As soon as I saw these two men, I just bolted as fast as I could and they did too. I found the nearest alleyway to the main road, and I found a woman walking her dog not too far in front of me, so I decided to catch up with her and start petting her dog to kind of let the men know that I wasn't alone, if that makes sense. When I turned my head around, I saw the two men on the end of the alleyway looking at me, and they both just ran off, back into the alleyway, into, I assume, their van. I started running home, acting normal like nothing happened too when I got there, but I just, honestly, wanted to cry on the inside. So I'm a 16-year-old teen at the time, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and attending my first folk festival with a friend and her family. I'm a totally naive little white girl, completely smitten with the whole hippie thing, thinking that I'm so evolved and edgy like everyone else there. Cringe, I know. There was dancing, music, attractive people, and an unspoken and assumed kindness, empathy, and trust amongst total strangers there. Very anti-establishment and anti-individualistic mind frame. But also very anti-stranger danger because love is everywhere and everyone is connected and we're all valued and safe and blah blah blah. You know how it goes. Anyway, I was separated from my friend at the time and walking to the festival from the campground, when a tall slim white man in a white robe approached me and started chatting me up. He was weird immediately, but it was a folk music festival. Weird is normal and normal is weird here, and I'm an impressionable young girl desperately seeking approval. And he told me that I was beautiful and asked me where I was from, and I told him a small town about an hour away. It didn't say the name. And he told me that he was from the States and that his name was James in the Rain, and handed me his card. He gave it to me in the event that I'd be interested in attending another festival that he puts on in his own community. I took the card and I carried on. Eventually the festival ends, and 4 days after I've been at home. I'm at work, just slicing meat in a deli. James in the Rain enters the store and he immediately notices the wristband still on my wrist and says, "You're the girl from the festival." He continues to talk to me, doesn't buy anything, and even follows me up to the cash register to talk to me about random things while I'm just trying to serve other customers. At this point, I must admit that I was creeped out, and really I just wanted him to leave. He wouldn't leave though until I gave him a hug, so I gave him a hug so that he would leave me alone, and then he left. Later on though, I told my mum what had happened, and she actually looked him up on Google, and it turns out that This guy is a part of some commune called Rainbow People who recruit young women and brainwash them into leaving their families, forcing them to cut off all ties with their world and join their community up in the mountains. And how he figured out where I work now has me a little bit worried. This happened 15 years ago when I was 19. At the time, I worked on a cargo vessel, and this was my third trip to sea. The ship was around 30 years old when I was on board, which doesn't sound old, but it's pretty old for a ship. The vessel had been refitted a few times by the time that I was on board as well. I won't say the name of the ship, as I'll be naming people by position, so it would potentially lead to people being identified. For anyone who works in similar jobs, though, you'll know that it's like being the young, relatively new guy on an all-male team with people who've lived and worked together for months or even years. And in essence, you feel like a bit of an outsider and have to prove your worth, and also you can expect to have a load of practical jokes played on you. So, you can imagine when I joined this ship, and the guys are all talking about a ghost on board, I was like, yeah, whatever. But they asked me if I believed in ghosts, and I said no, which was actually a lie, as I had experienced things before. But anyway, they basically just said something like, "You will soon," and I just laughed it off. I think I'd been on board for about, maybe a week, I think, when I first heard a loud knock at the cabin door. I had my own cabin, but it was a small one in the middle of the accommodation, with no porthole. So I opened the door, and there was nobody there. I definitely thought that I was getting pranked, and this started happening regularly, and it would be at all sorts of times, often waking me up while I was sleeping with 3 loud knocks. And every time I tried to jump up and open the door as quickly as possible to catch the person, but I never saw anyone or even heard them running away or anything. Now, my cabin was roughly in the middle of a corridor. I'd say it was around 20 meters long, so you'd have to run 10 meters to get around a corner. And a few times too, I honestly felt like I'd opened the door quick enough that I should have seen someone. This got me thinking, though, that maybe it was someone in a neighboring cabin. I asked who was in the cabins next to mine. There was an old guy in one cabin who was in his 60s, and I'd never seen him move fast enough. The others were empty. This is quite common in older ships, as they used to get built to house more crew, but ships sail with less and less crew these days. And so, the knocking just continued. Until one day when I was at my wardrobe just hanging my shirt up, when literally I was right next to the cabin door when it knocked. I opened it so fast that I definitely should have been face to face with them. But when I did, the corridor was empty. I think that's when I realized too that there was something else going on here. After that, though, I started taking more notice of what other people were saying, and I also started paying attention to the oppressive feeling on board. I'd been on 2 ships previously, and I sailed on 4, more after this one too, and none had an atmosphere like that. Things got worse after that too. One of my jobs at night would be making rounds of the ship to check the cargo is secured, and there's no problems and whatnot. You take a radio with you so you can radio the bridge if you need to, and the radio would just sometimes loudly blast static for no reason. And if I radioed the officer on the bridge to ask if they said something, they would come back clear and say no, and there was no static for them. This happened with multiple radios, so it wasn't a dud as well. Now, one day on my rounds, I was in the laundry at 2 a.m. just making checks, and an alarm sounded, and I spun around to see the watertight door just closing behind me. I radioed the bridge and asked if they were closing it, which would be unusual as they only get operated in tests and emergencies. The second mate said no, and on his console it was showing open. But the door closed all the way, and the second mate radios to tell me to try and manually override, as he can't do it from the bridge as it still says open. I used the lever to override and open the door. I radio to tell the mate, and he says he'll get it looked at by the engineers. I carry on with my rounds, and as I approach the next door, the alarm sounds and it starts closing again. I radio the mate, and he says he's not going to do anything, and I'll just have to override again. This time I get it open, and as soon as it's fully open, it starts to close again. I look around, and the other door is also now closing. At this point, I'm getting shut into the laundry, and I get this really weird feeling of just impending doom. And it was right about that time when the lights begin to flicker and static just blasts straight over the radio. I jump through the closing door, a really bad idea because they can crush you, and I just noped the hell out of there. Now, theoretically, that could all be a coincidence of failing systems or someone playing tricks. The doors can be controlled from the bridge, but it's just not something someone would do as a prank since they can actually kill you. Also, when the door started closing, no one would have known that I was there. It was just me and the second mate and an engineer awake at the time, and there were no cameras. They did a full watertight door test the next day, and they also just found no faults. I should mention that watertight doors are each controlled by an independent system, so if one fails, they don't all fail, meaning that two doors experiencing faults together would be incredibly unlikely to say the least. After that, though, I just never went into the laundry alone again. On another night, I did my late night rounds as usual and reported back up to the bridge when I finished, but when I got there, the second mate was white as a sheet and shaking. He was holding a cup of tea that was sloshing about from how much his hand was shaking, and I asked if he was okay, and he could barely speak. Finally, he managed to tell me that he was sat in front of the radar screen 5 minutes earlier when he heard me come back to the bridge. He asked if everything was okay, and I didn't respond. He looked over his shoulder, back at me, but instead, it was an old guy, pale and wide-eyed, just staring down at him from just arm's length away. He literally fell off his chair, and the old guy just disappeared in front of his eyes. He said the worst thing was the expression of just malice on his face of this old guy as well. The second mate was weeping as he told me this as well, and he was a pretty tough guy, so I believed it. But the worst experience was definitely in my cabin. So I'd been on board maybe 3 months by this point, and had kind of accepted that I was stuck on this messed up ship. I guess some of the fear had gone as you get used to being on edge like that eventually, and I ignored my door knocking by this point. It might have even stopped happening, I can't really recall, but anyway, I get into bed one night, read for a bit, and I turn the light off. As soon as I turn the light off though, I think I see a figure stood over the bed, but it's pretty much pitch black, so I can't make out any detail. And after initially jumping, I reprimand myself for being silly and assume it's just my eyes adjusting. But then, the figure sits down on the bed, squashing my legs and turning its head towards me. Now, I can literally hear you guys screaming sleep paralysis at me right now, but I've experienced it before, and I can tell you that this wasn't that. I could move my arms and my upper body just fine, and I could move my feet, but my lower legs were trapped by the weight of something. I was frantically pulling at the blankets to try and dislodge this thing and get my legs out, but it was just impossible. I tried to reach for the light switch, but it was just a couple of inches out of reach. I started full-on swinging at the space where it should be sat, but my hands just didn't hit anything. I started screaming at this thing over and over again to get off me, and eventually the figure stood up and I could move my legs again. I hit the light, and when I did, there was nothing there. I'll be honest with you guys too, that I couldn't sleep without copious amounts of alcohol and a nightlight after that, and even for a bit after I left the ship, which, as you can imagine, was awesome for picking up girls in my early 20s. Hey, want to come around and stay over? Excuse me while I get myself plastered and turn my nightlight on. Multiple other things happened after this too, but this is already getting pretty long, so I'll skip ahead to the last big thing with multiple witnesses. So when I'd been in that ship about 5 months, me and the night watch were in the crew bar after our watch finished, probably at about 4 a.m. I was about to begin my routine of getting so drunk that I'd pass out and not care if a ghost sat on me or whatever, basically. We were talking about some of the weird stuff that we'd seen on board. It was me, the second mate, the second engineer, and a grease monkey, engineer lackey basically, and as we were talking, one of the guys looks across the bar and says, "What the hell?" And his mouth is open like an O, and we all look where he's looking, and a Henry Hoover is just floating about 2 foot off the floor with its stupid smiley face just looking at us. The second mate just swears in like an incredulous manner, and the Hoover gets thrown a few feet off to the left instead of just getting dropped. Obviously, we called it a short night after that one.